I never believed that a house could breathe until we moved to the one on Camden Road in Asheville, North Carolina. I had seen houses grown with age, settle in the night with little creaks and pops, but this was different. This one exhaled. I felt it on my skin as soon as I stepped inside. A faint warm draft on the back of my neck, like something unseen leaning in close to smell me. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 35 years old, and I thought my life was turning a corner when we closed on this house. My wife Hannah had been out of work for almost a year after the bank she worked for shut down its branch. I was scraping by on my job at a small construction firm, taking on side work where I could. We found the house through an online listing that seemed too good to be true. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, an acre of wooded land, and a finished basement. The price was less than half the market value for the area. We told ourselves it was our chance to start fresh. We told ourselves that every old house had a story, and that we could make this one ours. We signed the papers on a rainy Friday morning. By Saturday afternoon, the moving truck was gone, and we were surrounded by stacks of boxes. Hannah took our son, Luke, who is 9, upstairs to start unpacking his room. I stayed in the living room, breaking down boxes and trying not to notice the faint draft that kept brushing the back of my neck. The first odd thing happened just after dark. I had gone into the kitchen for a drink when I heard something shift beneath my feet. At first I thought it was the sound of the old wood joists creaking under my weight. Then I felt it. A slow vibration that seemed to come from below the floorboards. It was not a steady hum like a furnace. It pulsed. I crouched down and pressed my hand to the floor. The vibration stopped the instant my skin touched the wood. The house was still. When I told Hannah about it, she laughed and said it was probably the pipes, or maybe the washer running in the basement. I did not tell her that the washer and dryer had not even been connected yet. I wanted to believe she was right. I wanted to believe that a house could not notice you. That night, I could not sleep. The rain had stopped, but the air inside felt heavier, thick enough to taste. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps across the living room. I thought it was Hannah getting a drink, until I realized the sound was not coming from the same floor. It was beneath me. In the basement, I got out of bed and grabbed the small flashlight I kept on the nightstand. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that the sound could be anything. But when I reached the door to the basement, the steps stopped. I stood there in the silence, the beam of my flashlight aimed at the door, and for a moment I thought I heard something breathing on the other side. A deep inhale, followed by a slower, longer exhale. The same warm draft brushed the back of my neck and I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The door to the basement was old, older than the rest of the house. The wood was dark and warped, and the brass handle had been worn smooth from years of use. There was no lock, but when I tried to open it, it refused to budge. I twisted harder, put my shoulder into it, but the door would not move. Then something knocked from the other side. Once, twice. Each knock was heavier than the last, shaking the frame. My flashlight flickered and went out. When I stepped back, the knocking stopped. I went upstairs without looking back. The next morning, Hannah asked if I had gone into the basement during the night. I told her no and asked why. She said Luke had woken her up, saying he heard someone calling his name from down there. He swore it sounded like me. I decided then that we would not go into the basement until I had the locks replaced. I did not tell Hannah about the knocking. I did not tell her about the breathing. I wanted to keep the fear to myself, as if holding it in might make it vanish. By the 3rd day, the air in the house had changed. It smelled faintly metallic, like blood or rust. Luke refused to go into the living room, saying the shadows looked wrong. Hannah started getting headaches that no medicine seemed to touch. At night, the footsteps came back. Sometimes I heard more than one set. Sometimes they moved quickly, almost running from one end of the basement to the other. Other times they stopped directly under our bedroom and stayed there for hours. On the fourth night, I woke to find our bedroom door open. Hannah was gone. I found her in the hallway, standing at the top of the basement stairs. Her eyes were closed, and she was barefoot. She was swaying slightly, like she was listening to something I could not hear. When I touched her arm, she shuddered and gasped, as if coming up for air. She said she had been dreaming of her mother, who had died years ago, and in the dream, her mother told her she was waiting in the basement. Hannah looked at me and said she needed to see her. I told her it was not real and led her back to bed. She cried herself to sleep. By the end of the week, the basement door was no longer stuck. I found it open one morning when I came downstairs. The darkness beyond it looked thick, almost solid, and the air that rose from below was warm and damp, carrying with it the same metallic scent that had filled the house. I closed the door and wedged a chair under the handle. That night, Luke screamed from his room. I ran in and found him sitting on the floor against the wall, his eyes wide and his skin clammy. He said someone had been in his room, a man with no face, who told him that he belonged downstairs now. When I asked where the man had gone, Luke pointed to the floor. Hannah wanted to call the police, but I knew they would not believe us. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints, just the same pulsing vibration in the floor that stopped whenever I tried to feel it. On the 9th night, I made the mistake of listening at the basement door. At first I heard nothing. Then came the whispering. Dozens of voices speaking at once, too soft to understand, but all rising and falling together like a tide. The sound grew louder until it filled my head and I staggered back. For a moment one thought I saw movement in the crack under the door, like fingers brushing against the floor. When I turned around, Hannah was standing behind me. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her lips moving soundlessly. Then she spoke in a voice that was not hers. It was deeper, heavier, and it rolled out of her mouth like smoke. She said the house had chosen us. She said it was hungry. Then she smiled, and for the first time, I noticed that her teeth looked sharper than they had before. That was the first night I locked my bedroom door. I woke the next morning to the sound of humming. It was not a song I recognized, but it had a slow, deliberate rhythm, like someone trying to remember the words to something they had not heard in years. Hannah was not in bed. I followed the sound through the hallway, my bare feet cold on the wood, until I reached the basement door. The chair I had wedged under the handle was gone. The door stood wide open. Warm air rose from below, carrying that same metallic scent. Hannah was standing on the second step, swaying gently, her back to me. The humming was coming from her, but her voice was lower than usual, almost a growl. I said her name. She froze, then turned her head slowly toward me. Her eyes looked cloudy, like there was a thin layer of milk over them. She stopped humming and smiled. The smile was too wide, her lips stretching until I thought her skin might tear. She said I should come down with her, that it would be easier if we went together. I told her to come upstairs. She shook her head. She said she could hear Luke calling from below. I told her Luke was still in bed, that I had just checked on him. She laughed. It was not Hannah's laugh. It was lower, deeper, and it made my stomach clench. She stepped down another stair. I grabbed her arm and pulled. Her skin was warm and slick, like she had been sweating. She did not resist, but the whole time she kept smiling. When I shut the basement door, she blinked a few times as if she had just woken up. She asked why I looked so pale. She did not remember being at the stairs. Later that day, Luke refused to go into the living room. He said the shadows were moving. Again, I told him shadows could not move on their own, but he shook his head. He said they had been whispering his name. I asked what they were saying. He said they wanted him to follow them. That afternoon, I heard movement in the basement while Hannah was making lunch. At first it was the same slow footsteps as before, but then it turned into something heavier, like something dragging across the floor. I pressed my ear to the door and heard breathing again. Only this time, It was right on the other side, as if something was crouched there, listening for me. I stepped back, and the breathing stopped. When I returned to the kitchen, Hannah was staring at the window above the sink. She was gripping the counter so tightly her knuckles were white. I asked what she was looking at. She said there was a man standing in the yard, but when I looked, there was no one there. She insisted he had been watching her. She said he was pale and his eyes were completely black. She said he had smiled at her. That night I locked the basement door and pushed the couch against it. Hannah did not question me, but she kept glancing toward the door like she was waiting for something. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a sound I had never heard before. It was a wet, slithering noise, like something thick sliding across the floorboards. It was coming from the living room. I got out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The couch I had pushed against the basement door was halfway across the room. The door itself was wide open. Something was moving in the darkness below, but I could not see it. Then I heard Luke call my name from inside the basement. His voice was small, scared, just like when he had a nightmare. I started down the stairs before I even realized what I was doing. Halfway down, the smell hit me. Stronger than before, sharp and metallic, but now mixed with something sour, like rotting meat. The air was heavy, pressing against my chest. I called for Luke again, but there was no answer. I reached the bottom step and froze. The basement was not like I remembered it from the realtor's photos. It was larger, the walls damp and dark, with patches of something black and slick clinging to them. The floor looked uneven, like the earth beneath had shifted. At the far end of the room was a doorway I had never seen before. It was narrow and tall, the frame made of the same warped wood as the basement door upstairs. There was no light beyond it, just thick darkness. I took one step toward it, and the temperature dropped so fast, my breath fogged in front of me. Then I heard Luke again, but his voice was wrong. It was stretched, drawn out, and layered with something deeper, like another voice speaking along with his. He said he was in here, that he needed me. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the floor was holding me. I reached the doorway and tried to shine my flashlight inside. The beam seemed to die in the air, swallowed by the dark. Then something moved. It was quick, but I saw it. Pale skin, long arms, and fingers that ended in sharp points. It was crouched just beyond the threshold, its head tilted like it was studying me. The thing spoke, and the sound rattled in my bones. It said Luke was safe, that he was with them now. It said the house had been waiting for me. I stepped back, and the thing moved forward. Its face was wrong. Too many teeth, eyes that were just deep holes. I turned and ran up the stairs. As I reached the top, the basement door slammed shut so hard, the frame cracked. I pushed the couch back against it and ran to Luke's room. He was in bed, asleep, breathing normally. When I touched his shoulder, he woke up and asked why I was shaking. He said he had been dreaming about the basement. He said in the dream, I had gone down there and never come back. The next morning, Hannah made breakfast like nothing had happened. She asked if I had been in the basement, and when I said no, she smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. She said she had heard me down there talking to someone. By the end of the day, the walls in the hallway had started to sweat. Drops of water ran down the paint, leaving dark streaks. The smell of rust and rot was everywhere. Luke said he could hear the humming now, the same slow rhythm I had heard from Hannah. He said it was coming from the basement and from the walls. That night, I woke to find Hannah standing at the foot of the bed. She was holding something in her hands. In the dark, I could not see what it was, but it dripped onto the floor. She said she had brought me a gift from downstairs. She said if I took it, I would understand. I turned on the lamp. She was holding a small animal, maybe a rabbit or a squirrel. It had been torn open. The fur was wet with blood. She smiled and said the house was hungry, and we had to feed it. I took the animal from her and threw it into the trash outside. When I came back in, Hannah was gone. I found her at the basement door again, one hand on the handle, I pulled her away and locked the door, but she kept whispering that we could not keep it waiting forever. The following night was colder than it had been since we moved in. I could see my breath in the hallway even though the thermostat read 70. Luke's door was open a crack, and from inside came a steady tapping sound. It was too deliberate to be random. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again, like a signal. When I pushed his door open, he was sitting upright in bed. His eyes were closed, but his lips were moving. I leaned closer and realized he was repeating a single phrase under his breath. I could not make out the words. The language was unfamiliar, harsh and broken. His hands were clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms hard enough to draw blood. I shook him awake. But the moment his eyes opened, every lamp in the room flickered. He blinked, confused, and asked why my face was bleeding. I touched my cheek and felt 3 fresh scratches running from my ear to my jaw. There had been nothing near me that could have done that. Hannah stood in the doorway. She was wearing the nightgown she had on when we moved in, but the fabric looked older, frayed at the edges, with dark stains that had not been there before. She smiled faintly and said she had told the house it could take someone soon. My stomach dropped. I asked her what she meant, but she only turned and walked away toward the basement. I followed her to the living room. The couch was no longer against the basement door. I knew I had left it there earlier. The door itself was open just wide enough to see the first 3 steps. A warm draft flowed upward, carrying the smell of damp soil and something much older. Hannah stood at the threshold, humming again. I grabbed her arm to pull her away, but her skin felt different this time. Not warm, not cold, but waxy, like touching a candle that had been sitting in the shade. She did not resist. She simply looked at me with those milky eyes and said it was too late. Before I could respond, something moved on the stairs. Not a person. Too wide, too low. The wood groaned under its weight. My flashlight was in the kitchen, but even without it I could see the shape. It crawled on its stomach, its limbs bending in the wrong direction, and its head swaying side to side like it was sniffing the air. Hannah stepped back to give it space. I stood frozen as the thing reached the top step. Its skin was the color of ash, stretched tight over bones that seemed too sharp. The smell was unbearable now, like metal left in the rain, mixed with something dead. It raised its head, and I saw its face for the first time. No lips, teeth exposed in a constant grin, jagged and uneven. Where eyes should have been, there were only smooth depressions, as if the sockets had been sealed shut. Yet I could feel it looking at me. Then it spoke. The voice was the same layered tone I had heard in the basement. Luke's voice over something deeper, something wrong. It said the house had been hungry for years. It said someone always came, eventually. Without thinking, I grabbed Hannah and shoved her behind me. The thing laughed, a sound like bones snapping under pressure. The walls around us began to tremble. Paint cracked and peeled in strips, and dark liquid seeped from the gaps. I could hear more movement now, not just from the stairs, but from inside the walls themselves. Luke screamed from his room. I turned to run toward him, but Hannah grabbed my wrist. Her grip was so strong it hurt. She shook her head and said, "If I went upstairs now, I would not make it back." I yanked free and sprinted down the hallway. When I reached Luke's door, it was shut tight. I shoved it open and stopped dead. His bed was empty. The tapping sound was coming from the closet. The door rattled as if something inside was struggling to get out. I pulled it open. The closet was deeper than it should have been. The back wall was gone, replaced by an open tunnel of dirt and rotting wood, leading down at a sharp angle. From the darkness, 2 pale hands reached up, too thin to be Luke's, the fingers twice as long as they should have been. They clamped around my forearms and yanked. I fell forward, my knees hitting the splintered floor. The smell from the basement flooded over me again, stronger than ever. I could hear Hannah calling my name, but her voice was far away, muffled. I kicked and pulled until the hands slipped free. leaving long scratches down my arms. I grabbed Luke's pillow from the bed and tore the case free. His blanket was gone. The window was still locked from the inside. There was no sign he had walked out. When I staggered back into the living room, the basement door was closed, and Hannah was gone. The whole house had gone silent. No creaks, no hums, nothing. The kind of silence that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. Then, from deep below, I heard Luke again. His voice was clearer this time. He said he was fine. He said the house had promised to take care of him. He said I could join him if I wanted. The floor under my feet pulsed once, like the heartbeat of something huge buried beneath the house. I spent the next hour tearing through every room, calling Hannah's name, calling Luke's name, even calling out to whatever was inside the walls. No answer came. Every door I opened led somewhere wrong. The bathroom door opened into the pantry. The pantry door opened into the laundry room. When I opened the front door, I was staring at the hallway that should have been upstairs. The house was folding in on itself. I found my phone in the kitchen drawer where I had left it charging. No signal, not even the emergency call option. The battery percentage was stuck at 67, and no matter how many pictures I tried to take, the screen showed only static. The clock on the wall read 2:30 in the morning. It had read 2:30 when I first started searching. I pressed my ear to the glass, and the clock ticked twice before stopping again. Somewhere behind the wall, something tapped the same rhythm. I went to the basement door. The couch was back. In front of it, though, I had moved it hours ago. It felt heavier now, as if it had been nailed to the floor. I tried shoving it, but my hands sank slightly into the cushions, and when I pulled them free, the fabric was damp, leaving a dark smear on my palms. A voice spoke from upstairs. It was Luke, or it was meant to sound like him. The tone was too calm, too deliberate. He said the house had shown him the roots. He said they went deeper than the earth, deeper than bones. He said Hannah had already agreed. I ran toward the stairs, but halfway up, the steps began to stretch. Each one grew longer as I climbed, the top landing pulling away like it was being dragged down a hallway I could not see. My legs burned, and when I finally reached the top, I was standing in the attic. The attic ladder was gone. There was no way back down. Dust drifted in the dim light from a single bulb swinging overhead. Along the far wall, 5 mannequins stood in a row, each dressed in clothes that did not belong to us. Old coats, stained shirts, and dresses from decades ago. Their faces were blank, but their heads were turned toward me. I backed away and hit something behind me. When I turned, there was a mirror I had never seen before, taller than I was, and framed in wood, carved with spiraling lines. My reflection was wrong. My eyes were pale, my skin gray, and behind me in the glass stood Hannah, smiling without moving her lips. Her reflection raised its hand and pointed toward the floor. I looked down. The boards at my feet were breathing, rising, and falling like the chest of a sleeping animal. Each swell brought with it a sound, a low, wet groan that vibrated in my bones. Then the boards split open. A long, jointed arm shot up, skin the color of candle wax, fingers ending in cracked nails. It grabbed my ankle and pulled hard enough that my knee popped. I kicked at it until my heel connected with something that felt like teeth. The hand released me, but only to retreat into the gap with a scraping sound. The boards closed again, sealing without a trace. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection was alone now, but the mannequins were closer. Their arms were bent at the elbows, hands outstretched as if reaching for me. I grabbed the nearest piece of wood from the attic floor and swung at the mirror. It shattered silently, shards falling without a single clink. Where the glass had been, there was now a dark opening, wide enough for a person to crawl through. From the other side came the sound of water dripping slow, steady. I should have run, but staying in the attic felt worse. I climbed through. The space beyond was not another room. It was a tunnel. The walls made of black stone, slick with moisture. The air was warm and heavy, and the further I crawled, the more I heard it, a slow heartbeat echoing through the stone. After what felt like minutes, the tunnel widened into a chamber lit by a dim, greenish glow. In the center stood Hannah, holding Luke by the shoulders. His face was expressionless, but his eyes followed me. Behind them, the floor dropped away into a pit so deep I could not see the bottom. Something in the darkness below shifted inside. Hannah told me I had to choose. The house would keep one of us, and the rest could go. She said the house had always kept its promises. I told her we could all leave. She shook her head slowly, and Luke's mouth curved into a smile that was not his. The heartbeat grew louder. The walls began to close in. The chamber pulsed with every beat, as if the house itself had a heart. The green glow from the pit was stronger now, casting shadows on Hannah's face that made her look like someone else entirely. Luke did not blink. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. I told Hannah that we could find another way. She said there had never been another way. She said the house had rules older than the ground it stood on, rules that did not break for anyone. I asked her what it had shown her. She said she had seen the place where the walls go when they shift. She said she had seen the rooms swallowed whole and stacked in a darkness so wide it had no end. She said every soul taken was still down there, their voices stitched into the wood, their eyes hidden in the knots of the boards. Luke took a step toward me. His bare feet made no sound on the wet stone. He opened his mouth and spoke in two voices, his own and another. Deeper voice that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. It said the house had chosen long before I arrived. The pit exhaled, sending up a breath of air that smelled like old blood and rotting flowers. Something stirred below, and I heard the faint clink of chains. A shape rose up, pale, slick, and too long to be human. Its head was a mass of twitching fibers, and from within that tangled mass, a single wet eye opened, staring straight at me. I backed away, but the stone wall behind me was soft now, like clay. My hands sank into it when I tried to push off. Hannah reached out her hand, telling me it would be over quickly if I did not fight. Her tone was almost tender, but her eyes stayed fixed on the thing in the pit. The heartbeat quickened, shaking dust from the ceiling. The thing began to haul itself up, the sound of its weight dragging on the stone making my teeth ache. Its limbs bent in too many places, and where the joints met, the skin was raw and red. Luke walked to the edge of the pit without hesitation. The thing lowered its head to him, and from the twitching fibers, I saw a dozen small gray hands emerge, each with nails bitten down to nothing. They touched his face like they were memorizing it. I lunged forward to grab him, but Hannah stepped between us. Her skin was cold when my arm brushed hers. She told me the house only let go when it was fed. I looked into the pit again and saw movement, not just the thing, but faces. Dozens, maybe hundreds, looking up from the darkness, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes wide and glassy. Some were missing parts of their faces, as if the wood of the house had been carved from them. The thing began to pull Luke down. I grabbed his other arm. The deeper voice in his mouth told me it was useless, that the choice was already made. Then, the stone beneath my feet cracked. A gap split open, and something from below grabbed my legs. The hands were small, but there were too many to fight. They pulled hard, and I dropped Luke. Hannah leaned close to me, her lips almost touching my ear, and said the house had decided I would be the one to stay. The green glow flared. The thing roared, a sound that made the walls bend inward. The hands dragged me toward the pit, my fingernails tearing as I tried to claw the stone. I looked up and saw Luke watching, his expression calm, Hannah's hand on his shoulder. The last thing I saw before the pit swallowed me was the ceiling of the chamber, closing like a mouth. I fell for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand. The air was wet and heavy, and something warm brushed against my arms as I dropped. The green glow from above faded, replaced by a dull red pulse that came from somewhere deep below. When I finally hit the bottom, it was not stone that caught me but something softer. I sank into it almost waist deep before I realized it was not mud. It was hair, long, tangled, and damp, stretching out in all directions. The strands clung to me as if they were alive, tightening when I tried to move. The walls around me were not walls at all. They were roots, enormous, twisted, and glistening with moisture. They pulsed faintly, in rhythm with that deep, slow heartbeat. From some of the roots, faces bulged under the surface, their mouths moving soundlessly, their eyes rolling toward me. I tried to pull myself free, but the hair tightened again. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, a voice began to hum. It was soft, at first, almost like a lullaby, but as it went on, the melody bent in ways that made my skin crawl. I forced my legs free and waded forward, pushing through the hair until I reached a clearing. The floor here was bone, human ribs and spines fused together into a flat surface. In the center was a pool of black water, its surface rippling even though there was no wind. The hum stopped. Something rose from the water. At first it looked like a woman, her skin as pale as ash. Her hair trailed into the pool behind her, vanishing into its depths. When she opened her mouth, her jaw unhinged far wider than it should have. And inside I saw not teeth, but more hands, small and gray like the ones that had pulled me down here. She said she had waited a long time for me. I told her I wanted my family back. She said they were not mine anymore. She said the house was only a doorway, and I had stepped through. She said every step I had taken in that place had been chosen for me, that even my resistance was part of the design. The roots around the clearing began to move, curling toward me. Some split open at the ends, revealing black, glistening eyes that blinked without lids. I turned to run, but the hair on the ground lifted like a wave, wrapping around my legs, my waist, my arms. She told me there were two ways to stay. One was to become part of the roots, the other was to feed them. I asked what happened if I refused. She smiled, and for a moment her face was not her face. It was Hannah's, then Luke's, then faces I did not recognize. Shifting with every blink, the hair dragged me closer to the pool. The water smelled like iron and earth. She leaned close and told me to look down. I did, and saw the surface clear for a moment. Beneath it, I saw the house, not above me, but below, its rooms hanging in the darkness, like fruit on a tree. People moved inside, unaware, repeating the same motions over and over. I saw myself among them, sitting at the kitchen table, not moving, not breathing. The pool rippled again, and the image was gone. The roots tightened around my ribs until I could barely breathe. She told me to choose now. And then, from somewhere in the hair-covered darkness, I heard a voice call my name. Not Hannah's voice, not Luke's, a man's voice, low and strained. He said there was a way out, but it would hurt more than anything I could imagine. The woman hissed, the sound sharp enough to make my ears ring. The roots pulled harder. The voice calling my name cut through the heartbeat, sharp and urgent. The woman's pale head tilted, and her hair began to curl inward like 1,000 snakes. She hissed again, lower this time, as if warning something unseen. The hair around my legs slackened for the briefest moment. I tore one foot free, then the other, and ran toward the sound. The roots above moved fast, slamming down in front of me like bars. I ducked and slid beneath them, my hands scraping against the ribbed floor. The voice called again. It was closer now. I saw a flicker of light ahead, not the green glow of the house or the red pulse of the roots, but something white and sharp, like lightning trapped in a jar. I pushed forward, but the ground began to shift. The bone floor cracked open, and from it rose shapes like statues carved from meat, each with too many faces pressed into their surface. The mouths on them opened and began to speak in a dozen voices at once. They told me to turn back. They said the light was a trick. I kept running. The air grew colder. The roots here were smaller, thinner, and they twitched as I passed. Some of them brushed against my arms like testing my skin. I found him in a narrow corridor formed by two massive roots twisted together. He was tall, gaunt, and dressed in rags that looked decades old. His eyes were too wide, and his teeth had been filed into points. In his hands, he held the source of the light, a shard of bone, polished until it gleamed. He said it was part of the first one the roots ever took. He said it cut both ways, through the roots and through the one who carried it. He said that was the only way out. The woman's voice came from behind us now, no longer gentle. She told me the man was lying. She said he had been here too long, that he no longer remembered the truth. The roots began to close in from both ends of the corridor. The man grabbed my arm and shoved the bone shard into my hand. He told me not to let it go, no matter what I saw. Then he drove it into his own side. The moment it pierced him, the roots screamed, a high metallic wail that shook the ground. The man crumpled, blood running in thin streams down the bone shard, but he was smiling. He told me to run now, while the house was blind. I did. The roots tore at my clothes and skin, but they pulled back when I slashed at them with the shard. Each cut left a wound that bled a thick, black sap. The deeper I went, the more the air changed. It grew dry, dusty, as if I were leaving the wet, living part of this place behind. Then I saw light ahead. Not the white light of the shard, but daylight. I could smell grass and hear wind. I stumbled toward it, my chest burning. Behind me, the woman screamed my name, her voice shaking the corridor. I broke through the last wall of roots and fell forward onto dirt. The sun was overhead. Trees swayed around me. I turned to look back, but there was nothing behind me. No pit, no roots, no house, only an empty field. Then I heard Hannah's laugh. It was behind me, in the trees. Hannah's laugh was clear and bright, the way it used to sound when she was chasing Luke through the yard. I turned toward the trees, my legs still weak from running, and called her name. No answer, just the wind in the leaves. Then I heard it again, closer, as if she were circling me. I gripped the bone shard so tight, my fingers ached. The sunlight here felt wrong, too warm, too even, with no shift in shadows when the clouds moved. The grass in the field was knee-high, all of it swaying in the same direction, even when the wind shifted. The trees ahead were tall, thin, and spaced too perfectly apart. I stepped between them, following the sound of Hannah's voice. My boots crunched on dry leaves, but when I looked down, there were none, only dirt, packed flat, like the floor of a cellar. I called for Luke, hoping he would answer instead, but the voice that came back was not his. It was deep, male, and almost kind. It said I had come so far, and that was rare. Through the trees I saw a small clearing. In the middle stood the house, not the one I had left above ground, but a smaller version, as if someone had built it from memory and gotten the proportions wrong. The windows were black. The door was slightly open. I stepped closer. The bone shard pulsed faintly in my hand. The grass around the house was shorter, but it bent away from the walls, leaving a bare ring of dirt. In the dirt were footprints, dozens of them, circling the house, all barefoot, all facing inward. From inside, Hannah called again. She said she had found Luke, that he was waiting for me. I knew it was a lie, but my legs still carried me to the steps. The wood was soft, sagging under my weight. When I reached the door, I saw that the blackness inside was not shadow, but something moving, a slow, rolling swirl of hair. The man with the filed teeth appeared beside me, though I had not heard him approach. He looked worse now, his skin pale as the woman's, his eyes sunken. He said this was the way the house traveled. It planted pieces of itself in places like this, feeding on those who followed the voices inside. He told me I could still leave, but only if I drove the shard into the heart of the house. I asked where that was. He smiled with those sharp teeth and said I was standing on it. The ground shuddered beneath me. The bare ring of dirt around the house began to split, and thin white fingers pushed up through the soil, dozens at a time, reaching for my ankles. The front wall of the house swelled and breathed, the boards creaking like ribs under strain. I raised the shard dot from inside. Luke's voice cried out for me, high and frightened. The man shook his head and told me not to listen. The fingers broke, the surface curling hard around my boots. The fingers around my boots tightened until I felt the bones shift in my feet. I brought the bone shard down hard into the dirt, where the man had said the heart was buried. The sound that came up from the ground was not a scream, but a wet gasp, as if something enormous had just drawn its first breath. The soil split wider, and a pale shape pushed upward, not a heart of muscle and blood, but a knot of flesh and hair and teeth, all pulsing together. It beat once, and the air around me bent inward. The man staggered back, shielding his face. He told me to keep going, to cut it open before it could wake fully. I drove the shard down again. This time it caught in bone, and the whole clearing shook. The house behind me groaned, its walls bending outward. Luke's voice was louder now, crying that Hannah was hurt, that I needed to help her. I turned my head just enough to see movement in the open doorway. Two small shapes, their outlines shimmering as if seen through heat. The man shouted for me not to look, but it was too late. The shapes stepped into the light. It was Hannah and Luke. That their faces were pale and soft, their eyes black from lid to lid. Their mouths moved, but the words came in perfect unison, telling me they were cold, that the house would keep them warm if I let it. The fingers around my boots dragged me an inch closer to the exposed heart. The air stank of rot and something sweeter beneath it, like fruit left in the sun. The man lunged for me, trying to grab the shard, but the fingers caught him too. They pulled him down until only his head and one arm were visible. He screamed at me to finish it. I swung the shard again, but before it could strike, one of the black-eyed children stepped forward and wrapped their hand around my wrist. The touch was ice, but it burned. My muscles locked. The heart pulsed again, faster now. With each beat, the grass at the edge of the clearing grew taller, curling inward like a mouth closing. The man's voice cracked as he shouted that this was my last chance. But Hannah's voice, or the thing using it, told me the truth in a whisper. She said the shard was never meant to kill the heart. It was meant to feed it. I looked down and saw that where I had cut the heart, the flesh was knitting itself back together, thicker than before. The shard in my hand was warm now, pulsing with the same rhythm as the thing in the ground. The fingers around my legs began to climb. Higher, the fingers reached my knees. They were cold, yet each touch left a smear of warmth that sank through my skin. The bone shard in my hand felt heavier with every heartbeat, as if the heart in the dirt and my own were moving in sync. The man's face was gray, his eyes rolling back. He mouthed something I could not hear over the thudding in my ears. Hannah and Luke stood just beyond the doorway of the shrunken house, their black eyes unblinking. The air between us shimmered, and I knew that if I stepped through, the pain would stop. The heart beat again, and my vision tilted. I saw not just the clearing but 1,000 other clearings, each with its own house, each with its own black-eyed family, all waiting. The bone shard was not a weapon. It was a key, and the house had chosen me to carry it to the next place. The man managed one last breath. He told me not to let it take me alive. Then the fingers pulled him under. The soil closed over him without a trace. Luke's voice, soft now, asked if I remembered the game we used to play, the one where he would hide under the blankets, and I would pretend to be the monster. Hannah smiled and said it was my turn to hide. The grass at the edge of the clearing folded in on itself, sealing us in. The air thickened, tasting of rust and old water. My knees buckled, and I dropped the shard. It landed point first in the dirt, and the heart shuddered in pleasure. I realized then that there was no killing it. The only choice was whether I went down fighting or let it wear my face for the next traveler. I snatched the shard and turned it toward my own chest. The moment the point broke skin, the heart wailed, not in pain, but in rage. The fingers tightened to stop me, but I drove the shard deeper. For a second, the clearing vanished. I was standing in my real yard, the sun bright, the grass warm, underfoot. Hannah and Luke were running toward me, their faces normal, laughing. I almost dropped the shard. Then the image shattered, and the black-eyed things were inches from me, their mouths opening wider than they should, their voices promising I would never see another sunrise. I pushed the shard in all the way. The fingers loosened, the hearts, beating, slowed. The grass at the edge of the clearing withered and fell flat. The house sagged, the doorway collapsing inward. I thought I was free, but as I fell, I saw my own hands, pale, soft, and wrong. The blackness poured into my eyes, like ink in water, somewhere far away. I heard the first cry of the next traveler stepping into a new clearing.